Dr. Max, on days like today, our newsroom, it seems like a never-ending discussion about how to talk about suicide on days like today. How can reporters and journalists who are broadcasting to arguably millions of people across the country responsibly talk about suicide, especially on a day as sensitive as today?
Yes, it's very important to do it responsibly. You don't want to glorify the suicide. You don't want to vilify the person who killed herself either. But you don't want to make it sound like this big, sexy kind of thing that would then potentially get people thinking, well, is this something that I could do to get attention?
We've heard so much from the community today through social media, phone calls to our newsroom. A lot of people recognizing that it's important to talk about suicide on a day like today, but there is a part of our community that worries about copycats, about us talking about suicide and someone turning around and losing their life to suicide in turn. How can we prevent copycats, and what can parents, loved ones do right now to responsibly talk to their significant other about this?
That is a legitimate concern. There's some research that shows that there can be copycat suicides, the same way that there can be copycat mass shootings. Usually that happens when the reporting has been very irresponsible, though. That's when it kind of gets into people's minds, like it's been glorified, and not necessarily something to be celebrated, but something that can get me attention. That tends to cause a lot of copycats. Usually, the people who are most at risk, though, are the people who know the person who committed suicide, and it's regardless of whether it is on the news, there's a risk that they might then also commit suicide or attempt it.
So the way that the coverage is portrayed, or the way that the coverage comes out, is really important in preventing people from moving forward, as is what happens on social media, because a lot of people who are struggling are there, and they get sucked into this black hole of comments, as so many of us regularly do.
Sure.
With what's happening down in those comments, how can we be more responsible on a day like today?
Yeah, that's incredibly important for everybody to think about. So the news media, the traditional news media, can glorify something like this and potentially cause society more harm than good. Social media can do the same thing, though, and that's where we have to police ourselves. There's a fine line sometimes between posting tributes and glorifying something, or being very upset and angry, which is a normal reaction for some people to the news of suicide, and then posting something very hateful. We need to hold ourselves back from that to make social media feel safe for those of us in the community who might be struggling more in a time like this.
Should the media be talking about this right now?
I think it's important for the media to be talking about this type of thing. What research shows is a little bit counterintuitive, actually. If the coverage can be done in a responsible, non-glorifying kind of way, it can actually help people who might be at higher risk for attempting or committing suicide themselves. It brings it out of the shadows.
We so often talk about in the newsroom how to help loved ones talk to people who are struggling. But what about the people who are struggling? Let's talk directly to them right now. What should they be thinking and knowing at a time like this, when they're seeing all of this play out on TV?
Yeah, that is incredibly difficult, and like I mentioned, that is a time for a lot of people. They feel very vulnerable, and the thought, like, well, maybe I should do this too, can pop into their heads very quickly. So that there's some onus on them to recognize that and to know, like, geez, I need to talk to mom or dad, or I need to talk to the school counselor, or I need to talk to my pastor and mention this, and then it becomes incumbent upon those people who hear that news to not freak out about it, and to be able to handle it appropriately, and to be able to have that discussion with them.
It sounds so cliche at this point, but you have to talk.
You have to talk. It's a cliche for a reason. It really does help. It doesn't. If you ask somebody about whether or not they're thinking about suicide, it doesn't put that thought into their mind. It doesn't increase their risk. It actually lowers the risk that somebody might actually attempt suicide. That gets me thinking. I want to turn the tables a little bit. So how does 9 News go about a story like this? What goes on in the newsroom when you're deciding whether or not to cover a story like this, and then how to cover the story?
Well, first of all, everyone's really sad for the school and for the girl and her parents right now. But the story becomes, for us, how can we help others? As a community news station, as a local news station, we have to do our best to help others. And the way we do that is we put up the number on the screen for the helpline. We talk to people like you about how we can speak to our loved ones. The number one priority here for us is preventing another one. Now, we're not going to be able to do that in every single case, but if we can help 1, 2, 3 people talk to other people, you create a ripple effect. At the end of the day, if we can reduce one suicide, we've done something good here.
I've been impressed with the discussions that I've been a part of, covering this story and other stories like this. Is it newsworthy? Is it going to be of benefit to the community? And I think most responsible news stations do that. Yeah, they are doing that right now. You noticed when you walked into our newsroom today, you just happened to come in early. We spent 30 minutes talking about how to cover this at 9 and 10 o'clock. I mean, there is so much discussion that happens behind the scenes, things people don't see, to prevent this from being a salacious story and rather one of advocacy and one that can help, again, prevent a death. Yeah, absolutely. Well, keep up the good work.
Thanks, Dr. Max.